And welcome to another Colin Crandall interview. This is going to be a special episode for United Force Combat MMA London to LA. Originally, you guys know me from MMA Power Hour, and I am with the very popular retired UFC fighter, one of the best commentators now in the world for the UFC, Mr. Alan Jouban. Welcome to the show. Great to talk to you again, my friend.
Hey, good to be back on it, man. I'm glad. I know it's been a while since we've caught up, but we're getting it done again.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you. So much to talk about, man. A lot going on in the UFC, and you're doing great at the desk. It seems like you're there literally virtually every week, but I guess it is somewhat of a rotation. So there are some shows. I guess no one can do every single show, but you're working what, two weeks a month, 3 weeks a month or something?
Pretty much, pretty much. There's a stable of guys, a stable of active fighters, and then retired fighters like myself, and we kind of rotate. And it generally consists of like guys like me, Michael Chiesa, Anthony Smith, Dean Thomas, Rashad Evans. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Even Laura Sanko. Laura Sanko does about everything now. She's like a utility knife for the UFC.
Indeed.
But she jumps in the rotation as well. So, Zach Candido, the head producer of the UFC, he kind of mans the whole charge. And he does a pretty good job at kind of splitting up the rotation that we're all allowed, equal amount of work. But, it's a good thing these days there's freaking 40 shows at the Apex a year. There's travel shows that are starting to come back more and more, fingers crossed we're getting out
Yeah.
more often. And then obviously it's like 15 pay-per-views, but the UFC doesn't, ESPN does a pay-per-view, so they're kind of separate. But long story short, they keep us busy, man, and we love it. I love going to work over there.
Very cool. It seems like a good time, and you guys all know what you're talking about, and you have a really good rapport, and it's smooth. It's always a really good show. I enjoy watching it a lot. So 3.5 years now since your last fight. Does it seem like that, or does it seem almost like yesterday or last month?
It might seem like 10 years to me, man. I mean,
That's
the first year or so that I retired, it was a tougher part of the transition because I didn't really know what my identity was. You're a fighter for so long, and that's you're it's just driven into you, beaten into you that like every day you wake up and you go and crush it, and you come home and you recover. And you go crush it again, and you train, some days twice a day, some days once a day, but that is your job, and you're always thinking about the next big fight, next big, that's when you get paid. That's when your money comes from. And so to go from that mentality that I did for 15 years, and then when I retired, it was like, well, now what do I do? Like now what's my purpose every morning when I wake up? Thankfully, as we just said, I work for the UFC that gave me something to look forward to and still be involved in the sport. But it still took a while to just be like, I guess I'm just gonna go punch the bag. But what's the purpose of that? Like I would always hit the bag with a purpose. Like I would
yeah,
see my opponent and I would say I have to drive myself into the red zone of fatigue and get there every day because I know somebody might be trying to outwork me. But now I could just work out and quit whenever I get tired. It was such a weird thing. And so what brought me back really, what kind of grounded me was going back to jujitsu. I was always a striker first,
right.
but Muay Thai was my first passion. Jiu-Jitsu was my second love, and then I got into MMA. But I really kind of dialed back on jiu-jitsu later in my MMA years, just because it was kind of like you break down what you do the most, and jiu-jitsu was something I did the least in my
Right.
fight. So I said, let me not put as many hours a week in jiu-jitsu when I'm doing more striking, more conditioning, more wrestling. So and after I retired, I moved to a new city, back to my hometown of Lafayette, Louisiana. So it was kind of like starting all over again. But going back to a gym and being able to go and do jujitsu and pick up where I left off and kind of have that purpose again, where I get to go compete with other guys, have that camaraderie, like challenge myself a little bit. Maybe not on a fight sense, excuse me, but I'm still challenging myself where I'm not just kind of going to a gym lifting weights trying to hope my muscles get bigger. I'm still kind of evolving in the sport of martial arts, trying to always jiu-jitsu is like a never-ending journey. Even once you
For
get
sure.
your black belt, second degree black belt, you can keep going on and on and on. So that really helped me kind of make that transition. And now, like you said, 3.5, 4 years out since I retired, I really couldn't even think about going back. I mean, there's one day a year, probably, Colin,
Mhm.
that I wake up and I go, oh man, my body feels, my back's not hurting, my hips are opened up. I got a little pep in my step. I'm like, man, I bet you I could still compete with these young guys. And then the next day I wake up and I go, oh shit, I'm still an old man. I see why I retired. Not only am I 42 now, But those 10 surgeries, those 10 broken bones, the thing that kind of forced me into retirement, they flare up again. And it reminds me, I'm happy to now sit here at the desk and talk and help fighters and help educate the audience and let these young guys do this hard work. Because it really, said 1,000 times, it's a young man's sport.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. During that first year away, or whether it was the first 6 months or the first 2 years, was the UFC ever trying to tempt you? Like, were there some guys saying, "Hey, man, look, we got possibly a spot here for you"? Were there any almost comebacks during that time?
There was right in the beginning. So I can't remember if I had officially retired yet or not, like kind of came out and said it, but in my mind I had already retired. With my wife, I'd already had that conversation. I stopped kind of grinding at the gym. Still living in LA at the time, but a
Yeah.
couple months after that, Sean Shelby called and he goes, "Man, we got to fight for you." And it was a name that I'd always wanted.
Oh,
And it was on a pay-per-view. And
oh,
they said, "Look, man, we want to put you up against Carlos Condit on the pay-per-view." I don't
mm,
remember which number it was or where it was, but obviously pay-per-view cards are kind of like a bigger thing to be on the pay-per-view portion on the main card,
yeah,
fighting against a guy not only that I consider a kind of a legend, but it made sense because not only was he a name that I always wanted to fight, but he's a guy like me. Like he had been around for a while. He was, somewhat older, and like I wanted, I just wanted something that made sense. I didn't want to
yeah,
have one
yeah,
more fight against a debuter or a
no,
29-year-old to go against a legend like Carlos Condit. And he was again as a guy that everybody was always like, "Man, you two guys would make a tremendous matchup." And I'm like,
oh
"Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
oh
hell
yeah,
yeah, I would."
definitely,
So I wanted that, man, and it tempted me. It tempted me enough to go back to the gym and say, let me just give this a test run. And so I went and I sparred for like 3 days in a row, which is a little much, but I wanted to just see how would my body hold up to go through 2 months of training because it's really the training you have to get through. The fight is one thing, yes, but it's the training, which
yeah,
always like I acquired the injuries and I would have such tough time with. And anyway, it didn't work, man. 3 days of sparring, and I remember laying in my bed with my wife, and I just was like hurting everywhere, and everything was
yeah,
messed up. And I was just like, "There's no way, even if I dialed it back, which I would have to, even if I dialed it back, that I would be able to get through 2 months." And
right,
so
right,
I called the UFC and I said, "I can't, man." And then I think shortly after that is when I announced my retirement. But that would have been, oh, it was just a couple months too late. If they
yeah,
would have said that before my last fight or maybe immediately following it or something,
right,
I
right.
might have tried to have it. But I think I'd already kind of flipped that switch. And it's hard once you flip that switch, one foot out the door. I had probably more than a foot out the door, but to kind of come back from it at that time.
Yeah, absolutely, and it makes sense. And I'm as everyone can see. Also, I'm older than you, and I never fought professionally. But just the training gets harder and harder. And I haven't done jujitsu for a couple of years now. It kind of closed down somewhat early in the pandemic, and now I'm thinking if I go back to this 2.5 years later, and almost everyone is literally like 15 to 25 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And I know my late wife in heaven was saying, "Don't go back to jujitsu,"
Yeah.
And it's funny. I like to tell people who have never trained in jujitsu, if you're training hard with people that are as big or strong as you, or stronger, as young or younger than you, and you're going full speed, it feels like the opposite of making love. Would you agree with that?
I'm trying to think about this analogy real quick.
Yeah.
But
It's
I think what part of it is, there's a guy here in Lafayette, right? And
mhm.
he's, man, I want to say he's 70, 70 years old, roughly give
Wow.
or take 70 years old. And he's still
Wow.
in jujitsu
Wow.
every day.
Wow.
And it blows my mind because I'm always like, I feel like I'm the old guy now, right? I'm 42, but there's other guys that are, in the late 40s, early 50s, but this guy's 70 and he's
Wow.
a
That's
brown belt or
amazing.
black belt. And he has to be very aware of what he's doing and who he's rolling with and how he's rolling with the intensity
Yeah.
level. But I did a jiu-jitsu competition the other day, a couple weeks ago. I just wanted to kind of test myself. And I was in, they didn't have as many people to break thing down in age, weight,
Right.
ranking, everything. But anyway, they put it basically, 170 pounds and up, advanced, brown belts, black belts, maybe some purple belts. So he was in the same category as me. This
Wow.
guy's 70 years old, and
Wow.
he's not a small guy, but he's in the same category. We didn't go against each other.
Right.
We trained together, but it almost inspired me. I'm like, what am I bitching about? What
Yeah.
am I
Yeah.
saying? I'm the old guy just because there's a lot of 20-year-olds blue belts on the mat all the time. This guy's 70, And
Yep.
I'm saying maybe only have a few years left, but he's still doing it. And he has to be cognizant of how he's rolling and who he's picking, but he's still doing the art, and he's still learning and evolving. And it motivated me, man, not to gripe about things so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely at 42, you're still a young puppy relatively. If you really think about it, you've only been an adult for 24 years of your life, and by the time you're dead, God willing, you could have been an adult for 50 years of your life. But you're right, it's not like being 20, 25. For me being substantially older than you, and I'm inspired by what you just said about your guy who's 70. I mean, like what I think is this. When I was rolling in my late 30s and 40s and a little bit going into early 50s, I really was competitive with these young guys, and I really prided myself on really avoiding being caught in anything, and I wasn't always trying to be the last guy to tap because I'm not a jackass like that. You got to tap when you're training, but I was always really good at just fighting out of stuff. And I feel like if I go back now, I think I'm going to be that guy that's just tapping quick just to be smart. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's what I think.
Which,
Yeah.
and that's part of the transition as well. Like when you spoke about me retiring, and when I came back, I was going in sparring now and then, going and jumping in wrestling, and I had to find that happy medium of like, if a young guy's going hard and sparring, not even going hard, but he's testing the waters with me, and I'm testing the waters back with him. There has to become a point in your mind where you go, I don't have to win every round.
Right. Right.
And I don't have a fight coming up, so I don't have to kill myself. And I don't have to get every punch back if he lands a punch. And it's tough. It's tough to break the pattern, the cycle, the mindset that fighters have, or just people that do stuff for a living for so long. And I remember talking to my wrestling coach, Kenny Johnson, and he told me, look, dude, you're at that stage now. You don't even need to spar. What are you sparring? You don't need to do this and that. But if you do it, look, man, go this and that. Somebody does something, they make a mistake. You're the guy now that could stop it and go, look,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
you gave me your wrist. That's why I trapped the arm. If you don't ever give me you can kind of educate people. And I was
Yeah.
like, man, I hate those type of guys. They slow it down and they they're like teaching you while but I got what he was saying. He was like, you don't have to be the dog anymore that wins everything. And I started doing that, like in
Yeah.
sparring. I still have that competitive nature. And I think a lot of guys, if you put Uriah Faber on the mat with somebody, he's not going to give up, right?
No, no.
But he also knows that like it's your time now as well. And I'm just somebody that I'm doing this and I'm going to
Right.
compete when there's a competitive instance happening. But you could sit back. And so
Right. Right.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I've been working on these last couple of years, like pulling back on the reins, saying that you don't have to do everything as hard as you once did it.
Right. Nothing left to prove, really, I think is
No,
a good way to look at it. And that's a good thing. So I think your whole career you competed at 170 welterweight, or am I wrong? Was there an off?
correct.
Do you ever have a thought that you would have ever wanted to try 85 or 55?
I definitely couldn't have done 85, and I definitely couldn't have done 55. I always considered myself like a prototype of a
Welterweight, right?
170 guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
welterweight. I mean,
Yeah.
and I know this might sound like egotistical or something, but I'm a welterweight. Like, because I see so many bios, I study so many guys. I know what the average guy is, and the average welterweight is 6 feet tall, like I am.
Yep.
170, obviously, but they probably walk around at 190, 195, which I did. It's a
Yep.
20-pound
Hmm.
cut to be
Yep.
safe. And I
Yep.
lived in that 20-pound weight cut. Some of these guys, I remember when I used to train with Sean Strickland, he would beat my ass in sparring. But you know why? I mean, not only was he just great and he's tough
Right.
and you see the way he spars, but he would balloon up to 215. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
he would
Huge
have
welterweight.
20
Yeah.
pounds on a lot of welterweights. He was a
Yep.
huge welterweight
Yep.
at the time. And so those guys a lot of times eventually go up to another weight class or change. And so for me, welterweight was perfect. My reach, my height, my walk around weight was spot on. But I'll say this, if they ever did insert a 165 division like they've teased, yeah, that's something that I could have seen myself going into those deep waters and making that cut. And it would have been nasty. It would have been bad because I know when I'm on weight, I'm not happy, but I'm also not dying. And I've seen
Right.
so many guys that look like they're about to die
Yeah.
that the wrestling coach is dragging back them, literally dragging him into the sauna,
Yeah.
locking the door. They're trying, let me out. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
You got to make 3 more pounds. That's 45 more minutes of weight cutting. They're dying. They're crying, grown men. the
Yeah.
toughest guys in the world. I mean, they go to those deep waters, and I've never had to go there. I've always done it very smart, but I said 20 pounds is manageable.
Right.
25. When you start getting into those extra ones,
Yeah.
which if I went to 165, it would have been very uncomfortable. But I feel like I would have been a big one when
Yeah.
165, or where I
Yeah.
was a perfect size 170.
Yeah. I like the idea of the original weight classes, not original, but the weight classes they came up as substitutions. And I think it's been like 10 years now. And I've really been disappointed that no major organization has implemented all of them. A couple major organizations have implemented one, I think Habib with his Eagle FC. But I clearly remember, and I even talked to Dana about this at a press conference a couple of years ago and asked his opinion. And I said that they said that they can take out 170. Athletic commissions agreed for MMA competitions. You could take out 170, bring in 165, 175, 195, and 225.
Mm.
And a couple years ago, I had asked Dana about that, and he said, we've already got a hard enough time finding fights for the guys we have in the divisions we have. And he said, I just don't have interest in that. Then I kind of last second through and I said, how about a 105 for the women? And he said, that we might have interest in at some
Mm.
point. But it's unfortunate because in all honesty, I mean, everyone likes probably to have less weight classes, maybe as fans for whatever reason. I remember in boxing, and this is probably when you were a real little kid and I was a little bit older. I remember they started to add some weight divisions in the 80s. So you were just born then. And some people were pissed off. Like, what the hell? In the original boxing weight class, there was 5 weight classes or 4 weight classes. Now we got 7, and now we're going to make it 10, and now we're going to make it 15. And in boxing now, and I am a boxing historian, although I haven't paid attention as much since MMA's been around, but I think there's 105, 108, 112, 115, 118, 122,
So much, yeah.
126, there's junior, super, super junior, super junior. And so, but they get along, and the guys are not having to beat themselves up as much as our MMA fighters because there's so many weight classes. And I'm not saying MMA should do that, but I kind of like the idea of take out 170, put in 165, 175, and then throw in 195 and 225. And I think a lot of guys would find their new homes in those weight classes, and we would have some really exciting champions. And then the good thing is that there could be some moving around because the difference wouldn't be that much, and we could have some more double champs. And I think it'd be really exciting. So let me ask you real quick: if they had taken out 170 and put in 65 to 175, you was going to say you could have fought to get down to 65, but I would understand probably you would have stuck with 175. And do you think that would have benefited you at all, or would have been the same as 170?
If I went to 165, I think it would have benefited me because I know a lot of guys that I fought in my time, and probably still today, were cutting a lot more weight. I remember when me and Mike Perry fought, and right before they started doing this, kind of towards the end of my career, where before we would go out to the arena, they would weigh you. The UFC would weigh you on fight day. They want to know what's his like walk-in weight, the walk into the octagon weight.
Right.
And Mike Perry went first, and I remember we looked at his chart, right? And he was I think he was 194 or 195.
Mm.
And I was 186, right?
Big
So
difference.
I never put on a dramatic amount of weight after. So I'm essentially fighting guys 10 pounds heavier than me. So yeah, if I went down to 165, made that extra cut, I would have been bigger, put on a couple more pounds. I think I would have had a little bit of advantage there. Not a drastic advantage, but a slight advantage. More so, I wouldn't be fighting guys that had that 10-pound advantage on me. I think I would
Right.
be probably fall right in line with everyone else, the amount of weight that they were cutting. But I like the idea of adding the weight classes. I think obviously if you add a 165, then you have to add a 175 because you
Right.
can't
Right.
just go 165 to 185. So you have to
No.
add 2
Right.
classes right
Yes.
there.
Right.
But it essentially becomes 70, becomes 75. And so it's really like adding one. You still have the same amount of weight classes, adding one.
Right.
The thing is, I think it's something that the UFC is going to be open to as the sport continues to grow bigger and bigger. Because look at it like this. The UFC roster, I think when I got into the UFC, the roster was somewhere between 400 and 500. 500 was always kind of the cap. But it would go below there. And I remember they'd cut 40, 30 guys at a time sometimes. They would
Wow.
clean out the roster and you get down to the 400s or something. Now the roster is heavily inflated. The roster now is like 700 or so. It's because there's so many shows. As I mentioned, there's an Apex show every weekend. There's 15 pay-per-views a year. We've got Dana White Contender Series feeding fighters. We've got LFA, the number one organization to feed fighters as well. We've got looking for a fight, all these things. So getting into the UFC these days is a much easier and shorter route. You're getting people in there much sooner where they had to wait much longer. So you get the inflated roster. As the sport continues to grow, I think, and if the roster continues to grow, if we get up to 800 fighters, now, okay, we've got enough fighters to fill these extra. We add one, maybe two more weight classes. We've got fighters to fill those. And it benefits the UFC because now we have more title fights, right? And we need title fights. Obviously, you've seen all the hoops and hoots and hollers with UFC 300. Like, and you know, what's also interesting about it is like, think about how you stack a card. Normally, the title fight is the main event. Now, if you have two title fights, it's the bigger weight class that takes the marquee spot. And so more weight classes just gives more opportunities for more title fights. But the double-edged sword in that whole thing is two things. How much are we going to water down the roster by now spreading these weight classes a little bit thinner? And how many, and you said it a while ago, and I'm on the fence about this, but how many of these guys now are going to become double and triple champs all the time? Because right now, I think it's too much. Before we got on the air, I retweeted, I think it was Brian Martin or something, saying, look, there should be a minimum. Once you become champion, you should have at least 5 title defenses. And once you've cleaned out the division, then we could talk about jumping weight divisions, going for the double champ status, which I totally agree with, because nowadays, it's as soon as you become champ, they're talking about going up to 185 when you just won the 170 belt, or Sean O'Malley's talking about changing weight class. It's like, no, man, you need to defend it. You haven't fought a wrestler yet. You haven't defended the belt yet. Like, we need to see you clean out the division. And the only thing I worry is with all these divisions, more champs, and it's a smaller distance, 10 pound, 10 pound, 10 pound, much easier to change weight classes. So I think Dana's going to have a headache with that, but at the end of the day, it's going to make more money because there's more fighters on the roster, more title fights to happen, and we need to keep filling spots because there's going to be fights every weekend in the future.
Absolutely, and less weight cutting. I think so. It could be safer.
Smart,
yeah. What did UFC 298? Did anything surprise you on that card?
Okay, this is gonna sound it's gonna sound funny, but I'm gonna credit myself because everything I picked went according to plan, if I'm being honest. When I did my picks on SiriusXM before the show, every fight on the main card, the pay-per-view, I picked accurately. And I don't think there was any huge surprises. So I think most people probably got that accurate. I thought Ilia Topuria would do well. I did not think he would be able to finish Volk in the fashion that he did. I mean, that was shocking to see.
Yeah.
Volk is so tough. And even that head kick by Islam from a 55er didn't put him out.
Right.
Like Ilia put him out. So it just shows it was power, but it was timing. It was the timing of that punch.
Yes.
But I gotta say, man, the one thing that kind of surprises me, but it's also a bit refreshing, Colin, is I thought there would be more uproar over the scoring of the Jeff Neal fight versus Ian Machado Gary.
Yeah.
Because let me say this. Before the fights, I picked Machado, Ian Gary to win by decision. That was my pick. I thought the odds makers had it wrong. They had Ian Gary minus 250, which to me I go, no. I think he's gonna have a very tough time. So I just want to say this first. I picked Gary to win, and he did by decision. But watching the fight, and I could be wrong because I've been wrong, like where I was adamant about something, and I watch it back, and I talk to my peers, and they disagree with me, and I go, man, I thought shit happens, but I thought Jeff Neal won that fight. I thought Jeff Neal won it. I thought he had the more powerful shots. He did the damage, and he obviously stalked them around the octagon. And so a lot of those rounds that were kind of close, you look at shots landed, you look at damage, and you look at like ring generalship and cage control and all that. I thought Jeff Neal won some of those rounds. And you know what? One of the biggest parts of it for me, when I significant strikes to me, I don't even pay attention to that shit anymore. They show the numbers, but every little teep to the stomach, like that, like a glancing blow, it's considered significant. Every little slap is a significant strike. So those aren't damage. I
Right.
judge significant strikes by the reaction of the opponent. And everything that not everything, but the majority of the stuff that Ian Gare is landing while he was moving and evading, which is very slick, but it wasn't damaging Jeff Neal. Even those knees that they go, oh, shoot, perfectly timed knee. Jeff Neal kept coming forward, throwing punches. I'm like, so he wasn't damaged. He wasn't hurt. He didn't slow down. It didn't change his pattern. But Jeff Neal definitely damaged. You saw Gary stumble a couple times, bloody nose, this and that. So I thought Jeff had won that fight just from the kind of more impactful shots, but I did not think it was a robbery in any way because, I mean, the broadcast thought that Gary was clearly winning it, and I was actually disagreeing with Joe Rogan and John Anik, which I would never. John Anik's like the Godfather, you know what I mean? But I was like, man, are these guys watching the same fight as me? So I know I'm rambling on. I'm sorry, I
That's
apologize.
fine.
But I
No,
guess
you're good.
my point to this whole thing was, aside from that, I thought Jeff Neal won after the first reaction. I thought we would hear everybody rumbling about, oh, it's just a robbery that it's set up. MMA is fixed. They want their golden boy to be the champion. And I didn't see that today. I didn't see it yet, but I'm actually very happy. I'm so happy because this whole everything's fixed shit, I'm so
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a close fight. It was a
Yeah.
close fight. I mean, the broadcast thought Gary won, and two of the judges thought he 30-27. So maybe I just was looking at it a different way. But a lot of these fights aren't robberies. It's just very close fights where
Right.
you're tuned into one guy rather than the other guy.
Yeah, very well said. I felt that Neil edged it as well, and I've been watching UFC fights since I bought UFC One, and watched all of them ever since then. And I was scoring stuff and boxing for like on my own, just watching fights for like 10 years before UFC One. I was very young at that point. But yeah, I thought Neil edged it. And I agree. All the fixed fight BS, it is tiring because that's not what's going on. The one thing that I was going to ask you is though that if it seems like judges have an amazing knack of making the guy who's the hot young prospect the winner in a close fight. And I'm starting to get a little sick of that. I almost wish that they could maybe have you guys or Dana or something walk over to the judges this time and say, don't do that shit. Don't look at anyone like they're the A side tonight.
Yeah.
Nobody's the A side. Don't do it. Stop doing that shit. And I know that would be interfering with the athletic commission, so they're not going to allow you guys to do that. But I feel like if ex-fighters were the judges, that shit wouldn't happen. Because if
Yeah.
you were judging that, you'd have no reason to say, "Oh, I want Ian Gary to win," because you say, "Who cares? Whoever wins wins." It makes no difference whether he's the young prospect. But I said in a Twitter Spaces before that, I said I think they have the odds off. This is a very close fight. This is going to be the toughest fight for Ian Gary. And then I said, I forget my exact words, but I said, but Neil better either beat the crap out of him or stop him, because otherwise the judges are giving the fight to Ian Gary. And when they did, I was like, expected. And I wish that would stop. I wish that would stop. I feel almost like I feel almost like some of these judges are thinking, well, I'm actually part of the executive team here with the UFC, and I have to look out for future fights. And so what I'm going to do is make the young prospect the winner, because that will help make things exciting. And I know the UFC doesn't want anyone to do anything that they don't believe in. And I don't think the UFC would ask for any help from judges to do that. And they would probably say, don't do that. But interestingly enough, I think and it's not just the UFC, it ends up helping any promotion when the young prospects win. But with things like Patty over Jared Gordon and this shit, it's almost starting to be predictable. It's almost like if it's going to be close, you might as well bet your money on the prospect, because the judges are going to make him the winner. Not always, but it seems to me literally 90% of the time is what it is on that. And Jeff Neal is a tough guy, and I hope they reward him by the fact that really should have been a win. Ian Gary is interesting. This is your weight division. Pretty interesting now. You guys got Ian Gary, you've got Shavkat. You've got, Wonder Boy's still there, but you got Vicente Luque making another one. You got Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena coming up. Leon Edwards is there. There's talk about Kamaru maybe coming back down or Hamzat. So it's a very exciting division. Now, I know you would have been in some really exciting fights had that happened, but you were in exciting fights during your time, so it doesn't matter. Um, a lot of great matches coming up, and there's going to be some interesting things going on for sure. Where am I going? I had a question built in there. Is there any, and and I don't want to ask you questions that you shouldn't answer working for the UFC, but which fights, let's say, of all those guys, are you most looking forward to seeing? Obviously, Gilbert Burns and Jack Della Maddalena will be really interesting, but are you looking forward to something like maybe seeing Shavkat or then there's Bilal? Bilal is super exciting. Like if you could matchmake them, whoop, knocking everything all over the place. If you could matchmake the next few 170 fights, which who would we see fighting who?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Bilal should fight for the title, obviously, and I think it worked out. Dana mentioned that he offered Leon Edwards three fights in the welterweight division to try to get him to main event 300. That didn't work out. We have the answer now for UFC 300. Not the fight that everybody was hoping with Jamal Hill and Alex Pereira, but what that did is that made the right fight probably happen more likely because now Leon Edwards versus Bilal could headline a 302 or something like that, where it makes more sense because they don't have to be this big star recognition. Because everybody was like, we don't want that fight for UFC 300, even though that was the most need to make fight on the whole card or out of the, that's the fight that has to happen. But it wouldn't have made sense for 300 because it didn't have the star power. Now that fight could happen. So I'm very happy kind of the way that things worked out for Bilal. I mean, for Bilal that he's probably going to get his title shot, I would imagine now. Also that Jack Della Maddalena fight, Burns, that's going to be fire. I'm really curious to see how MVP does now that he's in the UFC. Michael Venom Page coming over. They've got him going up against
Kevin Holland.
thank you, Kevin Holland. I mean, that's it's like stylistically, you look at those two guys, it reminds me of like when they brought Justin Gaethje into the UFC and they gave him right away Michael Johnson. We're gonna give
Yep.
you a freaking banger right away to see like we're gonna pull that style out of you. We're gonna pull the best fight out of you and see if you're cut from this for this. And they did that right away with MVP. They gave him Kevin Holland, not an easy guy to fight, very tall. He can match him in the range and the length. He's gonna talk. It should be MVP. He has his antics, so that should be a fun fight. I'm curious to see how MVP does. Obviously against the roster in the UFC. But fights coming up, man. I mean that I'm more invested because he's a local guy, he's a friend of mine. Dustin Poirier, not a welterweight fight, but Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. That I think is going to be it could be a brilliant night for Dustin. I think a lot of people are on the fence about this fight, saying this is such a dangerous fight, and it is. It is. This guy is. I'm high on this guy. I'm a fan of Benoit Saint-Denis. Uh, I think Dustin may be getting him at the right time
Yep.
before he's quite there, because I don't think he's quite there yet. I think he's very good, but when you really break him down, I think he has like dangerous striking, nervous energy striking, a lot kick heavy, but then he shoots on you. And I think his wrestling, even though he didn't really come up as a wrestler, his wrestling is really his biggest asset. And Dustin is able to, in the big octagon, make him take some long shots, kind of, and take him into those deep waters. Like he hasn't really been there in those deep waters against a guy tough like Dustin and experienced that level yet. And if Dustin could just make this a boxing match, and it's a southpaw versus southpaw, lefty versus lefty, and this also lets Dustin Poirier open up his arsenal. Now Dustin gets to use his jab, his body punches, his combinations. Where like with Dustin's usually fighting, an orthodox guy, it's not as boxing friendly. But you see, look, southpaw versus southpaw, Dustin Poirier is outboxing Conor McGregor and all these other people. So southpaw versus southpaw, it's going to open up Dustin's hands, which is obviously his asset. It's going to make maybe a trickier takedown for Benoit Saint-Denis. But yeah, I'm very invested in that matchup. I'm hoping Dustin could get that win back, get in that win column, and then see what happens after that.
Absolutely. No, we got 1 minute and 15 seconds left. So let me give you rapid fire questions. Give me 5-second answers if you can. Have you tried Dustin Poirier's hot sauce yet? Is it good?
I've got 3 of them in the fridge. They're awesome.
Awesome. Will John Jones stay around long enough to fight Tom Aspinall?
I really hope so, but I don't know that it will.
Gotcha. Where can people follow you? I know you mentioned SiriusXM. We're at like 55 seconds. So let us know all the places people can follow you.
Yeah, I mean, check me out on any social media. It's at Alan Jouban. I keep it nice and simple. And then I fill in on SiriusXM Tuesday, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. So check those shows out.
Fantastic. And I'll do that for sure. Alan, really appreciate your time, brother. It's so good to see you after all this time. And I really appreciate the chance to talk to you once again.
Absolutely, brother. Good catching up.
Definitely. Have a great one.
Take care.
And take care. You too. And thanks again, everyone. Catch you next time. Peace.